Hi, and welcome to the shop. I decided that I would do a short video on boxes and box making. I get a lot of questions about it, and I just completed this urn for a cousin of mine, and so the construction of it and everything is probably what's going to go into most of this video's details, but I wanted to touch on a few other things in that there's so many differences in boxes and how you can make them and what they're used for. So I thought I'd show you some of the ones that I made. And there's a couple in here that my father made years ago. This one here probably over 65 or so years ago. And that was when he was just sort of getting into the work, and it's a heavier construction than it really needs to be. But still, it's something I treasure. He always carved his initials on all these boxes: Samuel Peter Spier, SPS. And he had a lot of bird's eye maple, apparently, because most of his work was made in bird's eye maple. So let me start by saying that there's a lot of different methods for construction. This is a piece of redwood burl that I got up in Northern California, and it's the root. And you can see where the tree, just a small piece, where the root began. And this little box I made, it's called a bandsaw box. And what I did was I first sliced off the top, and I sliced off the bottom. And I'll show a close-up, but there's a fine seam right here and right here. So I take off the top, I take off the bottom, and then I come in this way and I bandsaw in and the shape that I want, and then re-glue the bottom back on and re-glue the top back on, and it creates, it's a nice little stash box kind of thing. I love the wood. It's very lightweight. If you ever get a chance to work with redwood burl, I suggest you do, because it's very easy to work with and it just has a lot of character. So that's a bandsaw box. Now, setting that down for a second, this is similar. This is the bandsaw where you're just cutting it out. This box I made out of a solid log of walnut, and you can tell that because the grain carries across the top and down into the end grain. You can actually follow the lines. And in this case, what I did was I bandsawed the top of it off, and then came in with the Forstner bits, and I drilled down in these corners, and then I put a box around it in order to reinforce these sides so they didn't blow out. And I used an actual router with a 3.5-inch bit to slowly work my way down into it. But you can see it's fairly uneven along this corner here, because I was mostly afraid of blowing out the end grain. But I think it came out well. And then I carved the top with a hand chisel just to shape it sort of like a river. And all four of the corner radiuses I intentionally did with different radiuses, trying to make this look a bit more sculptural rather than just utilitarian as a box. Now, the next one I did was this large one, and I was working in a theater in Raleigh across from the State University campus, and I noticed at the end of the year students were throwing away their scrap pieces of lumber into a big dumpster. And I thought, that's crazy. So I ran over there to see what was in there, and there was this beautiful mahogany. I didn't really know what to do with the mahogany because it was so thin. So this looks like a really nice sized big chunk, but it's really not. It's really made up of very thin pieces, as you can see here. They're probably at the most 3/16 thick. And so my way of getting more out of this scrap lumber was to do this sort of construction, and I made a candle box for my apartment where I put the long candles in, because those are always kind of hard to store. So this sat under my coffee table for many years. This was probably done 35 years ago, at least. But the construction of it is similar to some of these others, and that's the part that I want to show you and talk about for a moment. So let me just put this lid back on here, and I'll go through the other descriptions, and we'll get back to that. Method. Now, this one my father did that I said was very heavy, and he put brass screws all along this, gluing this top to this part, and he did dovetails on the corners, as you can see there, and this was a box that he made to hold his Sargent combination plane, and up here he drilled out some holes for the rods of the plane to go in. The plane fits in here, and in these little cubby holes he has all of the cutters. So this was really a utilitarian box, but he obviously must have done it out of the love for the wood and the plane, or he wouldn't have done such a nice job on that. I think that's lovely. It was given away by him to his brother, oh, some 55 years ago or so. And then his brother gave it to his son-in-law, and his son-in-law gave it back to his brother's son, and his brother's son brought it back to me. So it was sort of a return thing. So just like the world, everything goes around in circles. So he made this box, and he made this box at the same time, and this was another toolbox. This held reamers in it, and you see it's pretty rough inside. But the way he did this construction, you can see, is this little tongue and groove here on the end, a little lap joint with an incise, and these overdoing it on the hinges here with a piano hinge. Still, a nice little box, bird's eye maple, and I had to refinish this one because it's stuck in the shop for many years, just sort of stuck on a shelf. This one here is another utilitarian one that he made out of teak. He was working at a boat shop, and they had a lot of extra teak, so he made this for his molding head cutter, and all of the bits for it. And here he got a little bit lazy, cutting these grooves at one time in the lid and the bottom. But the construction of this box is similar to my tall candle box, and I'll explain that in a second. So those are some different methods. This is a jewelry box that I made for my mother. I don't really know how many years. I had this little handle from a cabinet, and that's what made me decide to make this jewelry box. I made a couple of them and gave them to my sister and my mother, and just a little jewelry box here. Again, with this method of giving a stop for the top, which this one, you see, doesn't have. This one here is just cut around to this proportion so that it just fits in like that. It's a little sloppy. And this one here I made with a rosewood veneer on the top, rosewood sides, and this one is a little different because it has a mitered corner rather than a lapping joint. And this one I made for my little Stanley 1 plane, and what I did was I put the plane in, I covered it with saran wrap, and I put in that spray foam that expands, and so I put that in and fitted it to the box and to the plane, and then removed the plane and then covered this foam with this silk or satin, and then put the plane back in so it doesn't move. There's no jiggling. and then line the bottom with some felt. So I'm going to stop here for a second because I want to get into the construction of some of these, and this will be a good breaking point. I'll show you some of the photographs of some of the other boxes and how that's done, and then I'll get back to you at the end. Thanks. Here are some of the close-ups of what I tried to show you earlier, but I figure this is a better way to show you. You see this line here and this line here, and this is the lid coming off of this bandsaw box you see with the cutting out, gluing the bottom, not gluing the top back in, but I did have to hand carve this part so that it fits snugly in that box. That was one. This is the construction that I was talking about on the bird's eye maple box, and what he did here, you see the way he joined these like that, and how thick this is. And then the bottom is just glued all the way down across the piece. The problem with this construction is that as this expands and contracts, you can see that this has left a little piece here after so many years, you know, where this is contracted. So that's a problem with that kind of construction. And here is the one with all the brass screws going around it like that, and the dovetails that he did. This one will show you my method of doing this lip here. First of all, the bottom is glued to the sides. Here's the side, and the bottom is the sides are grooved, and the bottom goes into that groove. And then what I do is I just do this lap joint here with a rabbet or along here, and then or a dado, and then, not a dado, it's a rabbit. So this side just laps this side here, giving you the impression that you have all long grain, but there's just a little overlap here of this one over this to hide the end grain of these pieces. And then inside here, you can see how this piece here is this 5/8 inch thickness, and this edge here laps that. So it's hiding all the end grain of that. And then you see this is integral with this piece, and I'll show you how to do that. A lot of people will add this afterwards. Roy Underhill did a video on this, on his little box, and he adds these pieces. I have a way of doing it that is not an addition, and it's the same method that this is done in. This long candle box, you can see the front edge just laps over the end, creating long grain here, and the only end grain is these little corners here, these little edges. And here you can see how they're rabbited over each other, lapping each other, and hence hiding the end grain of this. And then this piece here actually has a rabbet along the side here, so that on the edge here, you can barely see it, but there's actually about a 1/16 of an inch overlap of the top over this side here. Now here's the way that I do that. When I have the sides, I cut all the pieces of the box all the way around. And let's say this is the side. This is the top of the box, and this is the bottom of the box. What I do is, before I glue the box together, I come in and I cut this dado or groove here to this half depth, half the thickness of the piece of wood. So that would go, that groove is only all that's in black all the way across, and the rest is left whole. Then I glue the whole box up completely, but I remember, I write down the exact distance from this point, from the lid, with the lid on it, down to this point. And so then I come back, and on the table saw, I cut this groove on the outside of the box. And when that groove and that groove meets at that point, the box will just pop apart, and you'll have the top of the box with a lip coming down, and it will push down into that, so that completes that area, and this completes this area. And right there, and create a tight little opening like this. And as you can see, there's the inner cut. And so this was about that thickness. And then it drops in and it creates that lip. But this one here is a little different. And let me show you how this one's done. It has an inner lining, another compartment in here. It has two compartments. Now, the reason this one is done a little differently than some of the others is because I wanted a miter on the corners. And I knew I could do that without having to do showing dovetails, because I'm not a big fan of that. I prefer a piece to be kind of finished and clean on the outside and the joinery on the inside. I knew I could get away with the mitered corners because I was going to put in these stop blocks for that inner lid, and that would be glued up to hold those together. And this divider for the two parts of the urn will serve as support for the sides. So in this case, the box is made as one unit, and the bottom is actually inlaid into the groove of this frame in the bottom here. Here's the bottom. Now, there is a dado, or rabbit rather, right here, where this box is actually inlaid into this frame. When I made this molding here, I not only routed this edge here, but I also cut a rabbit in it so that this would be inserted into that. And so this is then glued around the bottom here and around the box itself. So there's no movement there at all. I wanted to make sure all this was nicely sealed inside there. Then I made this piece. I put a ribbon across here, and I made this piece to fit in like that, creating an upper portion here. And the reason for that was that they wanted to put a book that belonged to the person in it, and some other mementos, maybe photographs, maybe a wedding ring, I don't know, whatever they'd like to put into it. And that gives them this space above the ashes to do that with. Then this piece here, which is the top, you see in the pictures how I made this molding. This is just inserted into the molding, and then that creates this tight little lid with no movement. And the reason for this frame being done the way it is that creates the lid to hold this on. And I wanted this piece of wood, I picked this piece of cherry here to represent the mountains, which is where I live and where my cousin used to come to visit, and he happened to like this maple, so it's sort of a combination of those two. So I hope that you guys have gotten something out of this video. I know I enjoyed doing it. I do love some of these boxes here, and I wanted to share them with you. And I want to thank you guys who have subscribed to my channel. I really appreciate that. I haven't done a video in a while, and I hope this makes up for some of the absence, and I hope to get back to doing some more videos for you guys soon. I really appreciate you being here with me. You guys take care and stay safe.